So in this chapter, we're moving on to congruent triangles. If you'll remember, in the last chapter, we were doing similar triangles. Like, for instance, you would have a smaller triangle and a bigger triangle. They were similar to each other. Maybe these two angles would be the same. Let's just put them going the same direction. These two are the same, and these two the same. Okay, so it has all the same angles. And then remember, our sides were proportional, right? So like the two smallest sides, 2/4, since they're going the same direction, had to equal the ratios. The 3/6 had to equal the 4/8. And all of those reduced to 1/2. And so those were similar. Okay, now we're moving on to congruent triangles, meaning the two triangles are exactly the same. So if they're exactly the same, then they would have the same angles, but likewise they would have the same sides. Okay, so if you did the ratio of the sides, like 2/2 and 3/3 and 4/4, now those ratios are all equal to 1, because 2/2, 3/3, and 4/4 all reduced to 1. So now we're talking about congruent triangles. Everything's the same. All three sets of angles, all three sets of sides. So filling in the blanks here, congruent triangles are like similar triangles from chapter 4 because they have the same angles. However, congruent triangles also have the exact same sides. Therefore, congruent triangles are similar with their corresponding sides have a ratio of 1:1. Okay, that's what we just said. 2/2, 3/3, 4/4 would reduce to 1, or 1/1. All right, so corresponding sides will be congruent to each other rather than proportional. There are 5 different ways, these are shortcuts, 5 different ways to determine that triangles are congruent. You remember, like, our shortcuts for similar triangles, right? We had side, 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 angle, side, and the one we use the most, angle, angle. Okay, so the shortcuts for congruent triangles are as follows. 1, side, side, side. So when 3 sides of one triangle are congruent to 3 sides of another triangle, then the triangles are also congruent. Okay, the important part to notice is, remember, we have a different symbol. Okay, so remember, if it's an equal sign with this over it, like this is showing here, that means congruent. Okay, right? In the last chapter, it was just that, which meant similar. Okay, so we are doing congruent now. All right, so watch for that symbol. And then again, remember, it's called mapping. We're going to map these triangles in the correct order. So notice there are 3 sides that are congruent. They have the same markings, like the single mark, single, double, double, circle, circle. Okay. On, notice where they're on. They are on the 3 sides. Okay, that's why the shortcut is side, side, side. All right. So triangle ABC. So you're saying start at A and go to B. All right. So over here, starting at A is the same as starting at. Well, notice A is the angle between the side with the single mark and the circle. So the corresponding side, or the corresponding angle in the other triangle, is between there and there, the same symbol. So it's got to be F. All right, so it's got to be triangle F. From there, notice you go from A to B, because they're the ones that labeled it triangle ABC. From A to B, you travel across the side with the single mark. So do the same thing in this one. If you go across the single mark, you land at D. And by default, E is what's left over. There's how you map them in the correct order. Because remember, that statement right there, triangle ABC is congruent triangle FDE, is where you get all of your algebraic equations and everything set up. So that's really the most important part. All right, the next shortcut, side, angle, side. So when 2 sides and the included angle, notice, included angle of one triangle are congruent, So notice what we mean is I've got two sides here marked and there's an angle between them. That's what we mean by included. Okay. And over here, same thing. Two sides are marked and the angle between them. It's included. So when they are congruent to each other, all three of those things, then the triangles are congruent. Now let's talk about the mapping again. Triangle XYZ. So get to the appropriate same part. Notice where, I'll get rid of these marks so that I'm not confusing you. Notice where X is. X is the angle between this mark and the side that is not marked at all. Okay, this one right here, this XZ. So I want to go to the angle that is between the single mark and the side that is not marked at all. Okay, so M is the same place as X. That's the corresponding angle. From X, I am now going to travel to Y, because they're the ones that gave me Y next, right? Because we put them alphabetically. So from X to Y, I travel across the side with the single mark. So from M, I need to go to O across the single mark. And by default, L is what's left. So triangle MOL. All right, number 3, angle side angle. So when two angles and the included side are congruent on one triangle to another, two sides and an included side of another one, then the triangles are congruent. So again, notice we have two angles, and if you mark the side between them, that's what we mean by the included side. Okay, same symbols up here. You got those two angles, and you've got the included side. It has to be in the same place. So you know those are congruent by angle, side, angle. Okay, and then as far as the mapping, notice they're going to make the first one alphabetical. So they marked triangle EFG for us, is congruent to. Okay, so why don't you try that yourself? Okay, all right, come back and join me. So notice E is at the single mark. So I'm going to go to H. F has no marking, so I'm going to go to J that has no marking for the angle. And G has the dot, so I'll go to I, which has the dot. There you go. You are just going based on the symbols. H, J, I. Next shortcut, angle, angle, side. So when two angles and a non-included side in one triangle are congruent to two angles and the corresponding side in another triangle, then the triangles are congruent. So notice, you've got two angles this time, if I just look at one of these. But notice it's not this side that's between them, right? That would have been included. That would be angle, side. That would be angle, side, angle. That would have been what we did last time. Okay, that's not what's happening this time. So now you have two angles and then a non-included side, such as this one. Now the important thing to notice, though, is notice they keep saying they're corresponding. They need to be in the same place. So the quick thing you got to check for this is that this side is marked across from this same angle marking. Okay, so for instance, over here, if this, the same symbol, was not across from that marking, we'd be have an issue. Okay, so for instance, if the mark was here, it would be across from the dot instead, and that would make it not in the corresponding place, and therefore they would not be congruent. Okay, so you've got to be careful to make sure that they are exactly the same setup, okay, as they are here. Now mapping them, triangle ABC, alphabetical, you should be able to just go with the markings. So ABC, the dot, the single mark, nothing, would go with triangle EFD. Okay. EFD. Remember, these are all nice, neat capital letters because they are angles. All right, so before we go on to the next one, quick question. Why can't we determine that these two triangles are congruent? Okay, so just looking at the parts that are labeled, I notice in the picture this is an angle, and this is a side. So it's either going to be angle, angle, side, angle, right? It has to have something that has two angles and a side, or it's not going to be anything. It's not going to be congruent. However, we've said the super important thing is that it's got to be the corresponding parts that are labeled correctly. So I hope you are telling me these cannot be labeled congruent because notice this single side is across from that single mark. But this single side is across from the dot. And that is an issue. So however you want to say that for yourself, I would be saying the wrong parts are labeled congruent. Okay, and therefore the triangles are not congruent. All right. Next, the last one, the last shortcut is HL, what's called hypotenuse leg. So in two right triangles, that's going to be a key first. So make sure you're noticing it's a right triangle. You've got to have those right angles in there. Okay, so in two right triangles, if the hypotenuse and a leg in one triangle are congruent to the hypotenuse and leg in the other triangle, then the right triangles are congruent. Now, just in case you forget, in a right triangle, guys, the names, the side across from the right angle, the longest side is always called the hypotenuse, in case you've forgotten some of your terminology, and the other two sides are called legs. Okay, so here we go. We got two right triangles, and it says if the hypotenuse and one leg are marked, and that's what's happening in each of these. This is a leg, that's a hypotenuse, that's a hypotenuse, that's a leg. So if they're marked correspondingly the same, then they are congruent. All right, therefore matching the congruent parts, corresponding parts, then triangle JKM, alphabetical, is congruent to triangle. Well, J is the right angle, so it goes with X, which is the right angle. If you start at J and go to K, which is the side with no marking, then I've got to go from X and go to W, which is the side with no marking. And by default, land at Y. Okay, again, all capital letters. All right, so last but not least, guys, if you've kind of understood what's going on today, then once you've determined that two triangles are congruent, remember we said that congruent statement is what's most important. Then using one of those 5 ways, you can map the triangle and set up 6 pairs of congruent corresponding parts. So here you go. If you've got this statement right here, that's the key. That should tell you everything. If triangle PRS is congruent to triangle TWU, then name the 6 pairs of corresponding parts and mark them appropriately on the drawing. So notice the first column are angles. All right, the first letter showing up above is angle P, and it equals the first letter on the second one. So angle P equals angle T. We can mark them the same, P and T. Likewise, the second letter, angle R equals angle W. Again, just use a different symbol. So R equals W. And the third letter, S, equals the letter U, angle U. So S and U, again, make them equal with different marks. And then we're talking about sides. Remember side like PR? Since it's the first 2 letters up here, right? It would go with the first 2 letters here. So side PR is congruent to side TW. All right, side PR and TW. Mark them the same. We'll go with the second and third, side RS. From up here, RS goes with WU, side WU. RS and WU, mark them the same. And last but not least, the first and the third letter up above, side PS equals side TU. PS equals TU. And then once we start putting in variables and labeling the different angles and the different sides, you'll know your equations to set up, and you'll know exactly what to be able to solve. All right, that's what you need. Practice those. Good luck.